you're not doing something that I call regret proofing. You're not regret proofing your life. You're not doing everything possible in a very intentional way to do the things you want to do, say the things you want to do, say, be the person you want to become. You're not doing that. You're not trying to avoid regrets. You're kind of going with the flow. And as we age, we usually become more time sensitive, more very aware to the passage of time, time flying by, noticing that you've got fewer decades on this side than on that side. And so when you are not doing something about regret proofing, you increase the likelihood that you may not live intentionally in the way that will reduce the likelihood of regrets.
Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In 2019, I was a political science professor who was fed up with the stress and hostility of academia, not to mention the low pay. I left my tenure-track job and went from barely surviving to thriving as a freelance academic editor. Today, I own Acadia Editing Services, an editing and coaching business that brings in 6 figures a year. In this podcast, I'll discuss the challenges of academia, what academic editing involves, and what life as a freelancer looks like. If you're willing to jump outside your comfort zone, it is possible to find joy, true flexibility, and a profitable and rewarding career as an academic editor. Thanks for listening.
I'm here today with Suzy Rosenstein, who is a master life coach and midlife mentor. She helps professional women who are 50 and over to get unstuck and get clear about what they want so they feel relaxed, fulfilled, and excited about life again. Suzy is the host of the podcast Women in the Middle, and she's spoken frequently, in particular, about midlife career change. And so I asked her to join me today on the podcast to share her guidance with our listeners who are thinking about starting an academic business and perhaps even leaving academia. So welcome to the podcast, Suzy.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your own journey. How did you get into this business? What has your career path looked like?
Well, I guess I started when I was a kid because I was always curious about being an entrepreneur. I was doing calligraphy on envelopes when I was 12 and getting paid for that, like envelopes for big parties, weddings, that sort of thing.
Oh,
And
cool.
I fell in love with that then, but I had never really imagined myself being a full-time entrepreneur, even though I had many entrepreneurial gigs over the years. But I ended up going to school. I have a master's in applied social psychology, and I was really attracted to qualitative research. And little did I know that all of that long form interview I'd been trained to do and listening and looking for patterns in speech would be really beneficial for me years later. I ended up working in the health sector, in health publishing, health promotion, health education for 27 years. And my last job within that 27 years was 19 years. And that's where everything started to go down because I turned 50 at the end of my time there. And when I didn't know it was the end of my time there, I was stuck for 5 years. So I have my own stuck story that was very painful. And 5 years, by the way, is 260 weeks. That's a long time to be stuck. I didn't know anything about podcasts. I don't even know if I had a smartphone at that time. It was a different time. That was 12 years ago. And I got laid off eventually. So even though I'd been fantasizing about leaving, I wasn't able to figure that out. And it took me getting laid off and really exploring what it is I wanted and the nature of my stuckness. I had no idea what was going on, except I wasn't able to get clarity about what it is I wanted to do for a very long time. Finally, I had some insight that it had to do with people. I wanted to work more closely with people directly, the people who were looking for help. And I just realized that I was way more fearful than I ever imagined. And I never considered myself fearful. I always considered myself to be quite resilient. So as this was all going along, eventually one of my friends became a coach and I got some exposure to coaching. And I was very curious because I had been, in psychology for my formal training and so I was very open to the idea of coaching but knew nothing about it and ended up getting trained and diving in. And when I took that step to become a life coach, I had no idea what I was going to do with it, if anything. Work for somebody else, being a life coach, become an entrepreneur, or do something different and just have it in my back pocket. I had no idea. But then as I got going, I loved it and I did decide to take the leap. And I started to talk to a lot of women. So by that time, I was a few years in, and I talked to so many midlife women. I was definitely gravitating to the over 50 crowd because that's where I was, and I had just solved a big problem for myself. So I had some experience, I had some stories, and I really took to midlife coaching, coaching women. And that's when I had my next epiphany about what my why really was. And I started to meet all these amazing women, amazing, with so much possibility and potential, being so hard on themselves and so hung up on age. And even though so many of us might think that aging is okay, we're cool with aging, I don't have any hangups about aging, it comes out in so many ways that we don't even necessarily understand what we're thinking and what we might believe. And that bothered me at a very deep level because of experiences I had in my childhood by outliving my parents at a very early age. So I was 5 when my mother died at 32. I was 12 when my father died at 41. And what I grew up with, other than the trauma related to that, was watching 4 grandparents grieve the loss of their adult children. And my parents didn't have the gift of aging, that gift that so many people are complaining about and not really appreciating that it is a gift. Not everybody has the privilege to age. And as I started to appreciate why I was feeling so strongly about it and how hard women were on themselves, not appreciating their gifts, not appreciating what's still possible for them, even in their 50s, 60s, and beyond, it made me nuts. So that just really reinforced why I needed to do this work. And I love it. And it's been 12 years now. And I started the podcasts. The first podcast I started in 2017. Again, I didn't, podcasting wasn't new then, but it certainly wasn't the way it is now. So that podcast is 8 years old. And then I also last year started another podcast called Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs, the reality of running a business in midlife, like the midlife stuff that really comes up and gets in the way of how you want to run your business. Live Women in the Middle Loving Life After 50 is more about personal transformation and self-development. So there are a lot of interviews in there about people who figured out what they wanted to do, how they figured it out, and what it's like now, not being stuck, not feeling stagnant, not feeling like you're not content, certainly not feeling as happy as you want to feel. And it's been great. I never would have thought that at 62, I'm going to be a podcaster. Like that never entered my mind that I would have to be dealing with tech firsthand without a tech department and other than my husband and I guess my dog. When my kids are around, they're helpful, but really the answer is always reboot. Look it up on Google. But anyway, that's what happened to me. That's my journey, and I've never looked back.
That is such an amazing story. I think there's so much in there that people listening to this are gonna it's gonna resonate with them. I love that you talked about how you have a master's degree and you learned those academic research skills with qualitative research and all that, and that has served you in this new context. I think that's a big challenge that academics in particular have is we are trained to do very specific things that we think are only usable inside academia. And yet you go on this journey where you discover this other path, this other option of coaching or, for people listening to editing, whatever it is that you end up deciding to do. And you realize that that training and that knowledge and those skills really do serve you so well in this other
Yes,
environment.
very much.
Um, So I'm curious, when if people who are listening are, let's say they're a professor, maybe they're reaching the end of their PhD program and they're seeing the academic job market going, "Oh God, I don't want to have that life, but I have no idea what else am I going to do?" What are some suggestions that you have for people who are, maybe they're midlife and they've always seen themselves as this professor, as this identity of an academic or a researcher or a scholar? How do people start to detach from that identity and start to imagine something different for their future?
Well, it's a great question. And so many people, certainly the people I coach, are so many of them are dealing with just that sort of thing with whatever they've been trained to do and have done for a while, where they had a big investment. So there's a few things that come up that create that problem in the first place. The first idea is this, I've invested so much of my time and money and also invested in the identity. So a lot of people deal with that transition also with retirement if they're going to say goodbye to their original identity, professional identity, or empty nest when the kids leave and you're rethinking your identity. Rethinking your identity is really what I think is at the crux of a classic midlife crisis, in quotes. Midlife doesn't have to be a crisis, but it is a recalibration. It is an opportunity to make a change. And any kind of change can easily be full of fear and scary because change is something new. And when we age, we've been doing something for a while. And so if it's something new, you're a beginner. And when you're a beginner, you are not Miss Smarty Pants, who is dialed in, or Mr. Smarty Pants, but you've been dialed in with decades of experience and you're at the top of your game. And it's very different to be a beginner again when we're older and wiser. And I had that experience. This is a silly example, but a lot of times we need a little bit of a brain hack to get into what's really going on. But I decided when I turned 50, I wanted to do a few things. And one of the things was tap dance. And I hadn't tap danced since, I was 13. And I had it in my mind. I loved it so much. And I thought, I bet I can find an adult tap class. So I started to look, and then the first thing I had to do was go buy shoes. And all the fear came up of just walking into a dance studio with all these people, all these moms, all these little kids, and so excited about dance. And I was just, oh my God, like thinking of it as dance was so much scarier than thinking about it as tap. And so I was in this I don't even remember being in a dance studio. So I was in this place. I had to try on the shoes. I had to go in front of the mirror and do some, move my foot around and make some noises. I just was like, get me out of here. So I was afraid even of doing that. And then my first class, oh, I was afraid of looking stupid. I was afraid of falling. I was afraid that somebody else would think I was looking stupid. I might hold the class back. Like I had all kinds of thoughts. And a lot of that is just being uncomfortable being a beginner. The other thing that gets in people's way is they have no clue what's possible. So we've been dialed in, we've been doing the thing for a while once we have experience, and we get put into a box in our mind and often also by our jobs. And we don't start to imagine possibility. It's like we get very disconnected with other parts of us and with classic definitions of who we are and what jobs we're eligible to apply for and all kinds of stuff. So we totally forget the soft skills and how valuable they are in a workplace and as an entrepreneur, like personal attributes, like, how you work with others, communication, teamwork, how adaptable you are with project management and stuff like that. So many things. It's not just the classic skills that are on your resume. So the main thing we have to do is to start imagining why we think what we're thinking. And to do that, we just have to ask ourselves why. A lot of times people have more success writing it down in a journal, like if you consider it as a prompt. But when you catch one of these thoughts coming up, like when I realized, oh my God, I'm so uncomfortable being a beginner. I need to think about that. Why am I thinking that? And then give yourself the opportunity and the time. It might take a minute or two to write down exactly why you think that. And that's a bunch of other thoughts. A bunch of other thoughts will come up. And then you can look at them on paper and you're like, wow, interesting. Do I like my reasons for thinking those thoughts? You get to decide, do I like them? Because we believe so much stuff that just pops into our head, autopilot stuff that we've been thinking for decades. And as we age, we do have decades. So that's a long time to be thinking something. And to shake it up, to question it, takes courage and curiosity and a bit of self-compassion to, be kind to yourself as you're doing this exploration. And you can do this exploration while you're gainfully employed. You don't have to tell anybody. You can just privately start exploring what's coming up for you as you think about change. And do you feel the same way about being employed by somebody else in a similar or different job, but something that's not like dog grooming, like something really different from what you've been doing? I did look into dog grooming when I was considering what to do. And my research in grad school was relationship with people and their pet dogs, like children in particular. So I definitely looked into dog grooming and floral design and solar panels and coaching and doing a PhD in psychology and being a guidance counselor and landscape architecture. I looked into all kinds of things because I was just like, what have I always liked? And let's just explore in a non-judgmental way and see what thoughts come up. So we're always looking for our thoughts, our actual thoughts, because to grow forward, we want to become more intentional about our lives. And to do that, we have to be more intentional about our brain real estate, right? Like on what we're thinking, because it's creating feeling state for us. And it's very hard to do something new and exciting if you're full of fear. It's very hard to be motivated to spend time and resources exploring something or taking a risk or having a conversation with somebody about how did they make the change, if we're not feeling in a way that supports that behavior. So we have to get our feelings and behaviors to line up and be more about where we want to go and the woman we want to become, not so much about where are we now and is that okay? So another thing that's really important to think about is the cost, not just the cost of change, but the cost of staying where you are. And so much of the time, we don't really spend time appreciating that. But once you get a handle on it, it's valuable data to help you make a decision. There is a cost to you staying stuck. What are you passing up? It could be something as huge as allowing yourself to be happy. Now, what kind of a price tag would you put on that?
Mm,
Yeah, you could do the things, right? You could do all the things, get the paycheck, keep your benefits, blah, blah, blah. But what about who you really are and what you really want? And do you even know what that is? So we really do owe it to ourselves to think about that. There is a cost to staying stuck.
Yeah, that I really want our listeners to hear that because, I think especially when you are in academia, you're exactly right. It is decades that from when you start college to through graduate school, which is often 6 years or more just in itself, plus going on the tenure track or, taking these faculty jobs, whatever people do, it could easily be 20 years or more that you are operating in this very insular environment where all your friends are professors, all your friends are other academics, all your kids' friends, other parents if you have children, right? You are the only people you know, the only people you talk to are often in that same space, and everybody has the same mindset and everybody shares these ideas. And academia has been called a cult before, which I think is quite an accurate depiction. But everybody has these same ideas that being a professor or a researcher is prestigious. And of course it is, right? You worked really hard. You're a tiny percentage of the population who actually accomplishes this. But what does that mean for the rest of your life? Like I was talking with some other post-academic coaches, and one of them said, you can't eat prestige, like you have this prestigious job and you feel really special about who you are and what you do, and you do great work, I'm sure. But like, what about the rest of your life? What about your kids or your partner or your desire to travel or your desire to make a better income without working 80 hours a week? Or, like there's so much else that I think this exercise that you're talking about sitting down and journaling and examining these ideas that we have, these beliefs like I have to be a professor, or who am I if I'm not a professor? You know, there's nothing else out there for me, or I'm not
Well, and a close,
qualified, or
right, and a close relative is I should be a professor. So to really understand what you think you should be doing is fascinating. And then ask yourself, why do I think that? Well, that idea could have come from a teacher in grade 4, or it could have been your grandma complimenting you on some skill that you were good at. But are you just thinking it automatically without any reflection? We do not have to believe everything we think. It's just there because that's just you've trained yourself to be there.
yeah,
Neural
and
pathways create it and make it so easy for it to be there.
yeah, and I think we, as we're coming up through graduate school, we learn to brace ourselves for criticism and for negative feedback and to always anticipate that. And so when we have an advisor or a department chair or somebody who praises our work, it's like that brings us joy. That makes us feel like we have value.
Mm.
And the two fears that I think come up the most for people in my program is that fear of failure and the fear of letting other people down, like
Mhm.
specifically your colleagues, your mentors. I remember being terrified of telling my dissertation advisor, who I hadn't talked to in years, that I was leaving academia. And then I started to examine that and think, why do I care what this person thinks about me? You know, when I'm on my deathbed, am I going to be thinking about my dissertation advisor? Like, God, I hope not. You know, I'm going to be thinking
Great
about my
observation.
family and the life that I lived with them. And so, yeah, I think that's so important, that suggestion you made, to have people really question these beliefs that we've held for so long.
And even recognize that it is a belief, like it's a thought, and a bunch of thoughts create a belief. So, really, what is it? It's even interesting to get into the habit of catching those thoughts, to watch yourself think and grab a thought and write it down. And there's two more parts to this that I like to talk about with my clients. If you stay and you're unhappy, you're not doing something that I call regret proofing. You're not regret proofing your life. You're not doing everything possible in a very intentional way to do the things you want to do, say the things you want to do, say, be the person you want to become. You're not doing that. You're not trying to avoid regrets. You're kind of going with the flow. And as we age, we usually become more time sensitive, more very aware to the passage of time, time flying by, noticing that you've got fewer decades on this side than on that side. And so when you are not doing something about regret proofing, you increase the likelihood that you may not live intentionally in the way that will reduce the likelihood of regrets. And one of the most common regrets that people have is that they haven't allowed themselves to be happy. And when I first read that, I teared up because allowing yourself to be happy is on you, right? You didn't give yourself permission to even be curious about these other things. It's just like, no, that's not happening. I'm closing that door. And now, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably curious. So, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to be really curious and dig in a little bit more? Or are you just going to, cave in to discomfort because it's uncomfortable to do anything new? Nobody gets off the hook on this one. The other thing that's very common is that we don't imagine success as much as we imagine failure. And I've caught myself doing this so common. And I'm sure if you're listening now, you're also thinking, oh, yeah, it's much easier to go, this is a terrible idea. I'm going to be so embarrassed. And how am I ever going to show my face again? But you're not spending the same amount of time going, wow, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to become known in this new area. I know my work ethic. I know I'm also going to build a lot of skills and I'm going to also become experienced with this new thing. And wow, I can see how I might be able to make more money. It might be more lucrative, or it might be more flexible. And what I'm really craving is flexibility. Whatever success means to you, you're not imagining what it would be like to create that for yourself. You're just doomsdaying. I mean, this is very common. I was doing it too. My big fear is that I'm going to end up under a bridge with a shopping cart, and what I realized now that I'm an experienced coach and I'm used to doing mindfulness work and everything, I'm like, well, that's just a thought. And I'm not the same person I was when I was 20 and I was extremely poor. And if I missed one paycheck, I would have to, you know, go under the bridge with a shopping cart or ask friends for food. Or I was very poor in school and it really was dicey. I was also on a visa student in Canada. And so if I didn't have things up just so, I was very worried I was going to get kicked out of the country back then. So it's just a very important point to consider imagining success even before you have belief. You don't even need to work on belief yet, but just imagine that just as much as you're imagining failure, you can also imagine what it would be like to create exactly what you want.
So what are, we've talked about how people can journal to question and explore and examine these beliefs that they have about what they should be doing with their career or with their life. And you also talked about how you explored all these different options with between solar panels and dog grooming and all that stuff.
Indeed.
So if somebody is, and emphasizing, like you said, that you can do this while you are still in your current job,
Mhm.
what should the next step be? Should they interview, do like informational interviews? How do they go about figuring out what they might like to do as their next step in
Okay.
the story?
So so I would focus on what and not how. Okay. Just be curious. What are the things I might like to do, not how exactly I'm going to do them. And then with the what, it's all kinds of things. It's everything from watching documentaries, maybe doing information interviews. One thing I always did was open up the a virtual job board and just click on something I thought I would be interested in and read it and watch my feelings, my thoughts and my feelings. Like, is there something else? Am I curious enough that I want to click on something else? Or is it like, wow, this is not for me? Like I realized landscape architecture was not for me, and neither was dog grooming. And with solar panels, it was really only sales because I'm not an engineer or anything. So I'm like, but I had to click on things. So I like the comparison idea. And I did notice that as well when I was doing focus group work back in the day, is that a lot of times we get more clarity when we are comparing. So when I clicked on something and I imagine I had no intention to apply for any job. The opportunity that I was giving myself was just to grab some coffee or tea and just sit there for a half hour and be curious about checking out skill sets, doing a search, clicking on things. What am I leaning into and clicking something else and going, "Oh, that's interesting." And what am I going, not for me. I don't like this at all for whatever reason. So I like that sort of thing too. And the real work, though, is also thinking about your thoughts. We can't get away from that. Is what am I finding myself thinking that is not intentional? What's just floating in there and might be creating a feeling that's pulling me away from the way I would have to feel to do this change? Like if you're feeling all scared, it's much harder to take actions like to resign or to register as an entrepreneur or to make a little investment in a web domain or whatever some of the things are that you need to do when you move a business forward. So you need to have a feeling state to do things like that that are more like motivating, encouraged, excited. So if you're thinking something that's not helping you with that because you're feeling less than, sad, and fearful, you're not going to be able to keep moving forward. So it's really curiosity and compassion is what's required right now to allow yourself to explore and be curious with no action. Like you don't need to make a decision yet. You don't need to apply for anything yet. You just want to get more data. Because if you just sit at your desk, you're not going to get enough data. Talking to people is a great idea. I've had the experience where I was at the gym and I overheard somebody talking about a trip they'd just taken. I didn't even know him, but he was talking about a whitewater rafting trip in the Grand Canyon. And as soon as I heard him say that, I my ears. I was just like, what? That's my trip. How did you figure out you wanted that? I was beside myself with extreme clarity. Never, never even talked to my husband about it. It wasn't on a list of trips that we wanted to do with the kids, nothing. But as soon as I heard it, I was like, whew, we're doing that. And sometimes you don't even know what you don't know. I had a client tell me over the years that they heard somebody, she was newly retired, and she heard somebody else who was newly retired talking about a course that she'd taken in Italy, a cooking school. And right away, she's like, I want to do that. So a lot of times you just don't even know what you want because you haven't been opening the door to possibility for even stuff like that in probably a long time. If you're busy with your family, busy with your career, we really feel disconnected from our own desires. And your own desire is part of this equation. Some options that you explore may leave you with much more flexibility so that you can have the lifestyle that you want as well as the career. That's the other thing.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is you should explore without judgment and explore with that with just purely being curious about, what would it be like to do this or to do that? And if you say you look at a job like installing solar panels and you think, oh, I would hate to be on a roof every day, that's such a good reason to not go down that road. But if you explore something like coaching and your automatic thought is, oh, I couldn't do that. I don't know how to run a business. Maybe that's a thought that can be broken down. Like, well, why couldn't you learn? You learn to do all these other things in your life. Why couldn't you learn this too? And so,
That's
yeah,
a
I think,
great, Paulina, that's a great example because also that gets back to the what and the how. When we're exploring, it's very important to focus on what and not worry about how, like the running of the business, because the how will squish your dreams right away. I can't do that. It's too hard. It costs too much money. You just get in a spin about why you can't do it. But focusing on the how, I like to think of as foundation, like cinder block. So depending where you live, you might not be familiar with cinder blocks, but where I live, there's cinder blocks that make up the base of the house, the foundation of the house. And I like to think of the what that way. Once you solidify the what, then you move into the how and you ask your brain very different questions. When you ask your brain, let's say you decided to be an entrepreneur, that's the what. I don't have all the answers. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I want to be a coach, or I want to be a consultant, or I want to be an editor, whatever it is. That once that's clear, it's like, yep, that's what's happening. I don't know how it's going to happen, but that's how we're going to roll right now. Then, when you start to ask yourself how that's going to happen, it doesn't shake the foundation. It's like, well, how am I going to figure out how to register my business? Oh, and then you're not shaking the foundation. You're just like, okay, this is it. Step one, step two. Oh, here's a free guide from the government. Like there's things like that available. So it's very different to ask yourself how once the what is solid.
yeah, the destination is more important. Figuring out how do you want to spend your days? What is it that would bring you joy? And then once you figure that out, you can learn or research, which we're, as academics, we're very good at, right?
Yeah.
Both of those things, how to get to that destination from wherever you are.
Yeah, and there's another thing about mindset. So if you're finding really stinky thoughts in there about I should be more responsible. I I should stay in academia because that's what my grandfather wanted, or whatever it is. You'll find these shoulds. Getting rid of those thoughts is challenging. Modifying those thoughts is something very manageable that you can do right away. It's not that you can't extinguish a thought, but that doesn't need to be the goal right away. You can manage the thought. So if you see a thought like that pop in, you can think, okay, well, how can I think something? What is it that I could think that would create a different feeling for me other than I should be doing that? Could you be open to the idea that academia may not be the best next step to stay in or to apply for another position or whatever? So they're called bridge thoughts. So you want to insert a little phrase that just opens the door of possibility just a little bit instead of just closing it down. So I love the I'm open to the idea that, and it just moves you a little bit ahead. Another one is I'm learning that, and this is my all-time favorite one because I I know I'm a good learner and you're a good learner and people listening are good learners. So I'm learning that there might be other possibilities for me out there right away. For me, I use this thought with technology because my go-to thought is I suck at technology. Really had to work on this one. And now I know exactly what to think. I don't even need a reminder. It's just the way I think about it now. The other thought pops in, but right away I know what to think. And it's I'm learning to become a woman who knows how to manage the tech for her business. So it doesn't mean I'm a rock star, but I'm learning. I know who to call, I know how to search things, and usually if you shut it off or Google it, you can figure it out.
Yeah, I think, speaking of business and entrepreneurship, I think certainly this is true for me when I was still a professor, but I think a lot of academics have a very negative view of being a business owner. And that is a thought that I had to revise and break down myself because entrepreneurship today, you were talking about how you have a podcast and you're doing all these things in your business that you never expected you would do. It is having a business like what we do, coaching, consulting, service-based business is not at all like, starting a restaurant or opening a retail store, right? Like, yes, in many ways that could be very challenging, very difficult. Not that you can't do it or shouldn't do it, but having an online business does flow in a very natural way, especially if you're doing coaching, I think from being an educator, from being,
Hmm.
a mentor and advising students. And the flip side too, I think, is that, people take a negative view of business because we think it's all profit first. And I've found getting to know people like you and others in our community and stuff that people are actually very kind. They're much kinder than they were in academia. So, I've met so many business owners who are generous and kind and supportive and they want to lift each other up. So, I'm curious if you've seen any other parallels in, the transition from like higher ed to or education to business or, what is it about what are some things people might not know about starting a business or running a business?
Well, oh, this is such a great question. I definitely had a very strong observation. So my situation was like a teaching hospital, but very academic. And you get in the silos. You just don't meet as many people also from a variety of different backgrounds of education and experience with work and different kinds of jobs and just history and just everything. And once I called myself an entrepreneur and I realized, oh, that's where I am now, and oh, networking's a big deal, and oh, there's masterminds. And so I put myself in some free and some paid situations and communities, and I started to be blown away by the types of people I was meeting. And like you said, how generous they are and how authentic they are and how open they are to talking about failure and tactics and strategies and just so excited. Like it's a very excited group of happy people who are creative and trying new things all the time. It was the first time I met anybody who was building a business that surpassed $1 million. Like I didn't know anybody like that before. And now I had a front row seat of knowing somebody who was talking about it. And it was unbelievable to me, but really just also online now is more available than it was when I had a job, but the ability to meet people from all over the place is unbelievable. And as an entrepreneur, you always meet people who are, maybe I shouldn't say always, but people who are bricks and mortar entrepreneurs, online virtual entrepreneurs, like people are doing different things. And COVID also forced the hand of many people to be more open to online in professions they had no idea it was possible to do that. And so that's been fascinating too. But yes, I completely agree that you meet a wider variety of people with very creative, happy personalities. And I'm not saying that you can't be creative and happy in academia because research is a creative
You
endeavor,
can't. Let's be honest. You can't. It's not possible. No.
but it did strike me. And also, like, I'm working at home, you're working at home. Like, if we didn't make an effort, we would just be sitting here eating bonbons watching the leaves fall off the tree. Like you have to make an effort to meet people, even if it's online. You do need to make an effort or it's tough. But yeah, I think it's a very exciting cohort of people, the entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I so appreciate you talking with me today and sharing this wisdom. I think the biggest thing that I would take away is your point about how you get to choose how you spend the rest of your life. That this every day that we have is a gift, and we shouldn't take it for granted. You could be a 50 something professor thinking, oh God, I have to spend my next 10 years until I retire doing this, being miserable. But why? Why? Like, if you're lucky enough to get those extra 10 or more years, why not spend it doing something you love, and really take advantage of that time as a gift? So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And tell us about your program, or, if somewhere would like to send people, if they'd like to learn more about you and potentially work with you, where should they go?
Sure. Well, my website is suzyrosenstein.com. That's Suzy Rosenstein, Rosenstein.com. And of course, that'll be in the show notes. And if you want to talk to me about coaching, I've got group coaching with women. It's a women's group coaching program called the Women in the Middle Academy, and also private coaching. And you can reach out to talktosuzy.com. And I have a freebie that is super exciting. I have a new quiz. I've wanted to have a quiz for so long. I bought the domain midlifequiz.com years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and I finally cranked out the quiz. I'm very proud of myself. And you can check it out. It's about getting unstuck and figuring out what your future self is craving. What
Oh,
is your
that'll
future self craving? Like seriously, she has your back. She has your back and she wants you to figure this out. She's waiting for you. So it's midlifequiz.com.
All right. We'll get all that in the show notes, and I think I might take the quiz just to see just to
Oh
see how
yeah,
it goes.
definitely.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, and I really appreciate all of your wisdom.
Thanks, Paulina. This was a lot of fun.
If you're unhappy in academia and you think you might be a good editor or writing coach, check out my course, Becoming an Academic Editor. This digital course is paired with a 12-week group coaching program to support you through your decision to leave academia or not, and to start building a profitable and rewarding academic editing business. Learn more by going to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.